The Force of Others, a Star Wars podcast.
Hello there, and welcome to The Force of Others. I'm Matt Boitner.
I'm Zachary Owen Turner.
And as you can see, we have another full episode guest. Friends and neighbors, people from all over the galaxy, let's welcome an era of legitimacy to The Force of Others because we have a lawyer on the show today. Let's welcome Mr. Paul Hyde. Hey, man.
Hey, happy to be here, Matt. Happy to be here, Zach. Thanks for having me on today. I've been watching your podcast, loving it.
Oh, thanks.
Honored to be on this morning.
Yay! It's awesome. Well, and it is very. I hesitate. I'm happy to say that we have an original trilogy era fan on for this episode where we are going to be remembering James Earl Jones. Mm-hmm. I think that's good that we're going to have that perspective because the first time we saw and heard Darth Vader, it was on a VHS, which is an old sentence, but we did not get to see it in the theater back in the day. But we'll get into Mr. Jones in a minute. First, I want to just hear how everybody's doing in your real life. Zach, how was your week? How did Star Wars find you this week?
Yeah, I had a lot of family stuff going on, so Star Wars found me kind of directly in the middle of the week when we learned of James Earl Jones' passing shortly after we recorded our last episode. And it's just been a lot of people talking about that, really, with people. Some friends at work, we all texted each other like, oh no, one friend of mine was even like, do I need to reschedule my entire day just to have a Star Wars marathon? And I told them yes. And then I've been playing a little bit of Outlaws. Continuing with that, I'm about 8 hours in. Finally made it off the first planet. It's great. So, speaking of original trilogy time period, great game.
I had a buddy in my real life say that thanks to our podcast, he has purchased Star Wars Outlaws, and he's like, yes, I look forward to being very not productive in my real life for the next couple weeks, and that's thanks to you guys.
Nice.
But right on. But Paul, what about you? How was your week? How did Star Wars find you this week?
Well, pretty uneventful week, which is how I tend to like them. Of course, very sad news hearing of the passing of James Earl Jones. We seem to be losing a lot of legends these days, and it's very, very unfortunate, but it's not like it was a completely surprise or out of the question. He was elderly and had years like a good, nice, long life, but you always hate to lose those people that are just such a large part of your life, a large part of your childhood, and it's always tough to have those losses.
Yeah, right on. I agree wholeheartly. As for my week, it's busy. I didn't have as much of a Star Wars week as I did last week. By the time this right now is Monday, September 16th. By the time you are listening, it'll be Friday the 20th, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame opens that day at the theater that I work for. And so we are going into Tech Week, and if you don't know what that means, it means that in the theater world, that's when you take all your hard work and you put it in a blender and blow it out all over the wall, because now it's time to actually put all the technical elements into this show, and you see what will actually be able to take place.
Yeah.
And that's not to poo-poo the theater company I work for. We all do a great job, but it's just that once you put the practical reality into it, it's like, oh, okay. So we started Tech Week last night, and that is going. As for how Star Wars found me this week, outside of the passing of Mr. Jones, it didn't really. Oh, the only other thing was just that I got a big kick out of the other kind of most famous Darth Vader performer, Hayden Christensen, giving a really, really wonderful speech at Ewan McGregor's Hollywood Walk of Fame ceremony. It's so weird because I just remember being I was born in 1989, right? But essentially being in the prime prequel era generation. I remember when you weren't even clear if Ewan and Hayden even liked each other at all, just because Ewan would make fun of the prequels so much. He laughed when they announced the title of Star Wars Episode 2. You hear all these things, and he still kind of makes fun of those movies, but from time to time. But just to see that they have such a good relationship. And if you haven't seen the speech, look it up. You can find it on YouTube. You know, the Hollywood Walk of Fame, I don't think it's as big of a deal as it used to be, because now it's not even on Hollywood Boulevard anymore. It's kind of on all the streets in the surrounding area. You know what I mean? But just to see how much they really do care about each other, and to hear Hayden's stories about Ewan kind of taking him under his wing and being nice to him and mentoring him, not just as a Jedi Master, but as an actor, I thought was really, really sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so okay. So let's talk about Mr. James Earl Jones here for a little bit. Just for some opening thoughts. The first thing I got to say, just in general, I said this at the beginning of the podcast last week. Just my off-the-cuff thoughts were, when you hear about James Earl Jones' childhood, and I've learned about it more in the last week, that not only did he have a stutter, apparently
Huge
as a young man, it was debilitating, and he was practically mute for a lot of his early life. So I just think it's important to hold on to stories like that, right? That he went on to be known for, probably for I don't want to say necessarily for all time, but at least for a good long while, he's going to be known as having one of the best voices in cinema, stage, every type of entertainment you can have. So and I think part of that probably came from having to learn how to speak in a very measured, even tone, but then just his voice had all of that gravitas just because he had to learn to harness it. It's really, really cool. And it's really, really inspiring. And then you see all the celebrity tributes that came out over the last week. He seemed like he was a really, really nice guy. Like legitimately a really well-loved man. I wanted to pull up the one Anthony Daniels tribute, because you saw a lot of stuff. Mark Hamill had a really cute one that ended with, like, R.I.P. Dad, and, stuff like that. But my favorite one was Anthony Daniels, Mr. C-3PO himself. James Earl Jones was the sweetest man who played the baddest villain. Now that's acting. His voice will be with us always. So that was pretty good one from Mr. C-3PO. But Zach, what about you? Just kind of overall thoughts about Mr. James Earl Jones.
Yeah, I mean, what a career, what a guy. Everyone who worked with him seemed to love him, and for someone to start their life with a stutter, overcome it, become a Tony Award winner, and just like he is the voice. One of my favorite stories that he used to tell is, he goes, "What I make the most money on is not Star Wars, it's not Mufasa. This is CNN."
Yes.
He's the voice of CNN, and he made the most money off of that, which is, incredible. But, just like Paul said, he was 93. Not a total surprise, but still a shock to the heart. Paul, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys pretty well covered it. He was absolutely amazing, and just one of those voices that as soon as you hear it, you know it's James Earl Jones, no matter what context it's in, no matter what's being said. It's just instantly recognizable. One of those few people that, I'm not saying his image is not recognizable, because obviously it is, but that his voice is more recognizable than his image is, just because so much of the really great work that he did was voice work, like Darth Vader, like Mufasa. And things that we all grew up with, almost no matter which generation you were in, you relate and connect with and just instantly recognize the voice of James Earl Jones. So just absolutely amazing man, amazing backstory, like Matt said, and just a real loss to lose him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But. And it just didn't, we talk about the art and we talk about everything else, but it also just seems that he was legitimately just a really, really wonderful person, like we've said. But, so to us Star Wars-y fans, he'll probably most be remembered as the voice of Darth Vader, as like the life and breath and the heart of Darth Vader. because the mask is definitely scary, but it's so much scarier when you have that deep voice coming out of it.
Yeah.
But just speaking of him as a performer and everything else, what are some of our favorite non-Star Wars performances? Because he did have a lot. And so, Zach, I'll throw it to you first.
Oh, to me first. All right. So mine favorite non-Star Wars performances are Field of Dreams. He's absolutely just a gem of a human in that, and you so great. Sandlot, because that's another one that I grew up with, and Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah,
as the villain, which you're like, man, that's Darth Vader. Oh, he was just so great at playing villains and that fatherly, just mentor character. But.
Yeah. What about you, Paul?
Yeah, so first of all, that's the first thing that pops into my mind is just the Field of Dreams character, and I thought, got to mention him in that movie as a kind of shout out and tribute to our friend Matt Mickey Sheeran, because Sheeran just loves Field of Dreams, rightfully so. Wonderful movie, and like Zach said, just a wonderful, amazing character in that movie really seemed like is so similar to probably the real James Earl Jones, and so but my absolute favorite, personally myself, is The Sandlot. And even though I'm older than you guys, Matt, you said you were born in 1989. That's the year I graduated high school.
Yeah.
So I wasn't a kid watching The Sandlot, but, I was a young adult in my 20s watching The Sandlot. And it's just such a relatable movie for any kid, no matter what generation. The generation those kids were playing in that movie was before my generation as well. But you just loved him in that performance as the retired blind baseball player who, by his own statement, was probably a better baseball player than Babe Ruth, and that knew Babe Ruth personally, because when the kids say, Babe Ruth, and he's like, you mean George? Yes. Like they were buddies. And then it's got this kind of sadness to it in that he's this great baseball player that as he's talking about his baseball career, you can tell he just gets so excited. And he's talking about, he's like, I would hug the plate so tight the strike zone would almost disappear. And, and he's so excited about it. But then he tells about this pitch that went wild, hit him, and lights out from that point forward, Yeah. And the two things are he had this amazing talent for baseball that by his own statement, might have been the best baseball player of all time, but he was relegated to the Negro League and not able to play in the major leagues because of the time that he was in. So he never obviously made any money, got any wealth. He's living in a kind of a junk house there in this town that the kids play, that their Sandlot backs up to his backyard. And he's got of course, the dog there that they called the Beast.
That dog scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. I'm pretty sure I had nightmares. Sorry.
Yes, no doubt. And it turns out his name is Hercules, and he's this sweet dog that belongs to this sweet old man that used to play baseball and is now blind. And he gives those kids that baseball that's signed by the entire New York Yankees team, Murderers Row on there, all that stuff, and just gives it to them and says, I got tons of stuff like that. He just kind of looks around his house and that stuff's everywhere. And he's like, just have the baseball, give it to your stepdad. Just come by and talk baseball with me once a week or so, Yeah. And just again, such a just sweet, lovable, wonderful character. And that was just such a great movie. And that's one of the movies I've just watched over and over and over again, even though, like I said, it's not one that was out when I was a child. But I never pass up an opportunity to watch Sandlot. If I'm flipping through the channels and it's on, I'm stopping right there and watching it. So.
Totally.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's a classic. That was one that I discovered on syndication on TV. Because when I was a kid, that was just on all the time. And it was not until I was older that I actually saw like the whole movie top to bottom, and it was weird because I had all these memories of different parts of the Sandlot, and then I eventually went, wait, this is all from the same movie? Oh, because I would just kind of come, wandering in and out of the room. I'd be like, oh, cool, they're doing whatever, and anyway. But the dog was stuck with me as a very young man. I'm pretty sure I had nightmares about that dang dog.
Right.
But real quick, I wanted to point out for Mr. Jones, not only was he a Tony winner, he was an Oscar winner, he was a Grammy winner, he was an Emmy winner. He was one of the few. He got an EGOT.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes. The Grammy was for it was some narration work. But he's had a lot of Emmys, and at least 1 or 2 Oscars. Either way, but huge, storied, varied career. Of course, Conan was big for me. Watched it when I was probably way too young. It inspired a lifelong obsession with working out that I don't actually take very seriously because I do not, in fact, look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Probably never would, even if I was more consistent. But anyway, but just all of the poetry in that movie. It's such a silly, like, man's movie, but there is so much, like, the riddle of steel and all that stuff, and he delivers it so well. But like Zach said, This Is CNN was huge for me, as silly as that sounds. Not like I was a big CNN fan as a young man, but I remember...
Matt just had a hat with the little card in it and a little notepad. He was the CNN kid,
In the early 90s ago, what's the stock market look like today, Dad? No, it was... but it was... I think that was the first time that I was like, Dad, why is Darth Vader... Why is he on the news? And if I remember right, it was my pops explaining, well, that's an actor. And I was like, what? It all just, like, clicked. What do you mean? Darth Vader's not real? What are you talking about? He's in Star Wars right now.
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, Dad, like, But and another one was Mufasa. I'm pretty sure in the theater. That movie came out, like 93? So I wasn't big, but I do remember seeing that movie in the theater, and I remember going, wait, oh my God, that's Darth Vader. Whoa. And if I remember right, I was afraid for Simba for a little bit. I was like, this isn't going to work out. This is bad news, man. And then, obviously, it didn't work out for him. But yeah, like we've said, he played so many father figures. And like I mentioned with his EGOT, this clip went everywhere last week after his passing, but I'd seen it before. His monologue from the play Fences to his son, where his son is like, do you like me? And he's like, what do you mean, do I like you? Do you think I feed you because I like you? Do I work because I like you? Blah, blah, blah. And I mean, not a good character that he's playing. Very much if I remember right, it's another character that baseball didn't work out for. It was baseball, or it was a different type of sports, and then he kind of takes it out on his family. But either way, just the command of the stage that James Earl Jones has in that monologue, in that clip. Just look up Fences, James Earl Jones. It's just a monologue about, basically telling your son to grow up, but there's not a lot of, like, live theater performances that I wish I had gotten to experience. I would love to go back in time and just watch James Earl Jones on stage. I want to talk about a performer that doesn't need a microphone to fill the theater. Like, you could probably feel it, like, in your chest and stuff, you know what I mean? But anyway, the other big one, of course, Field of Dreams, like we both talked about. One of my favorite movies. Like everybody likes to say, it's not necessarily a baseball movie. It's another movie about fathers and sons, right? Nothing will ever there are a few musical moments that will make me just instantly start crying, but like the Field of Dreams theme. And when Kevin Costner turns on and goes, oh my God, it's my father, and I'm like, and weeping. But James Earl Jones's monologue about baseball. I'm not a big baseball guy. Sorry, everybody. What I love about baseball is that it can be a good baseball game. It can be a bad baseball game. I'm still sitting in the ballpark with my friends, having a beer and a hot dog, and just hanging out. But at the same time, I have been to Ranger games before where I'm like, wait, what's the score? Just because I have not been I've been talking to my buddies, but that monologue about baseball and what it means to people, what it means to America, that it is the timeless sport that before the pitch clock wasn't ever going to change, but that has changed now. That makes me care about baseball. These sports, art, whatever, it is more than just what it is, if that makes sense. It is what it means to you. And that monologue has been played in lots of baseball games over the last couple days. I think they showed one at, I don't know, whatever. A clip went everywhere of one of the Major League Baseball stadiums during the 7th inning stretch. They played that James Earl Jones speech. And it's cool, that his legacy will live on in more than just the Star Wars-y stuff.
Yeah.
But now to pivot to... Oh, go ahead, Zach. Go ahead.
Just to add on, because I know we have a lot of your acting students that listen and other people that are interested in acting, and just anybody listening in general. It's that Fences scene, there's a version of him doing it and a version of Denzel doing it, and it's a great, for an actor, it's a great way to watch two amazing actors do the same scene completely differently. If you're into acting at all, or if you just love movies or the craft or anything like that, watch the two and just to see the differences, because they're both wonderful, wonderful actors, and they both play it completely differently, and it's so fascinating to watch them back to back.
100%. 100%. It's the James Earl Jones is like the kind of angry, grounded, maybe a little more larger than life, and the Denzel is just the very much muted. That's more like the clouds come in and it gets very quiet anger. You know what I mean? But yeah, that's a good point, Zach. I like that. Acting students, you have homework. Listen to this podcast number 1, and then watch those 2 monologues number 2. I'll ask you in class next week after Tech Week. Anyway. But anywho, so it's a pivot back to the force of others, the force of Star Wars. So our Darth Vader is many, many things. That faceless mask that is just so scary, and you can kind of project whatever you want to on it. We can't. We're depending on time, we'll talk about actual Darth Vader more later. But we can't minimize the impact of David Prowse. Also, rest in peace. All the physicality that we associate with Darth Vader is David Prowse. He was the one that was on set. Obviously, also Bob Anderson, I think was that his name, because there were two or three Vader performers in the original trilogy. It was mostly David Prowse, and then I think Bob Anderson was his name. He did most of the duels. Because I think there was something I read that Prowse was just too strong and he would just break the props, and they were like, oh, okay. He didn't really have a lot of subtlety to his movement. So if Vader's being more fluid, that was one of the other guys. But either way, all the emotion that we feel in and from Darth Vader, in my opinion, comes from that James Earl Jones voice, man. So real quick, what are some of our favorite James Earl Jonesian Darth Vader moments? And we'll start with Zach.
All right. I mean, it's hard to pick. I'm going to do a funny one and then a heartfelt one. I laugh every time when Vader tells a dad joke, and it's from Rogue One, and he turns around and he goes, "Best not to choke on your own ambition, Director Krennic." And he's literally force choking him. It's like, come on, hilarious. And then just, all the stuff with him and Luke in Return of the Jedi, that you will join me. The inner conflict that you can just tell from his voice between him and Luke. And then, of course, I am your father. But,
yeah.
Paul, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, they're just everything. But like you just said there, Zach, in particular, the scene where he reveals that he's Luke's father, which I can tell you as a third grader, I didn't believe. Okay. Back in the day before we had the internet and the ability to have these fandoms, just regularly communicating and discussing and spreading information, let me just preface this with, if any time during this podcast I start sounding like some crazy old man, just yell, just yell out, "Get off my lawn," and I will immediately shut up. Okay, we'll know that I'm getting off into that territory that I need to avoid. But when you go see the movie, and that was it. First of all, my parents were not going to allow me to see any movie twice because they were just. I thought we were poor, but apparently we were not poor at all. I realized this myself. But as a child, I thought that I came from a poor family because we would have never been allowed the luxury of going to see a movie twice. So you just went to go see the movie, and now you've seen it. And I remember coming out of Empire Strikes Back and then going back to school the next Monday, or going back to school. It was in the summertime, but going back to school, talking to my friends when school started back up. And them talking about Luke being Vader's son, and me saying, "No, that's not true." And they're like, "No, he said it." I'm like, "Yeah, Vader said it." Okay, you're gonna believe Vader? He's a villain. All he was trying to do was lure Luke over by telling him a lie, and he could kind of read into Luke and see what he needed to say to him. And but it's not true. It's not true. And for 3 years, I said it was not true. And my friends all told me it was. And then turns out 3 years later, I was proven wrong. And, but that moment right there is just very, very intense. Luke just had his hand cut off and then he just drops into the abyss. And you think he's just dropping into nothingness even right there. Maybe as a kid watching it, as a third grader, you're thinking maybe that's even the end of Luke Skywalker right there. So that scene right there is probably my favorite Vader scene, aside from his redemption at the very end of the trilogy, of course, which is when you finally see the humanity in Vader.
And
Well,
he gives
go ahead,
that
Zach.
great. He gives that great line that James Earl Jones gives is, "Let me see you with my own eyes."
Yes,
Such
That
a
was
beautiful
intense.
work. Yeah.
Well, and it's like Paul said, see the humanity in Vader. I found an old AFI interview. I think we shared it on our social medias.
Yeah.
I cut it up a little bit so it could fit in a YouTube short. But one of the things that James Earl Jones talked about was when he was doing the voice of Darth Vader that he wanted to push it a little bit. He wanted to be an actor, right? He wanted to make Vader a little more subtle, a little more interesting. He said a little subtle, a little more interesting, a little more psychological and stuff. And that George Lucas was going, "No, you've got to flatten out this Reed. This is a guy that he's not. He's not. What George said was he ain't human anymore. Like, not really. That's not there. He's. What I take out of that is Vader is repressing all of that stuff. He's not letting his emotions come up, because as soon as he does, of course, that's my son." Right? I'm going to protect him. I'm not going to kill him like the evil emperor wants me to or whatever, right? I'm going to rise up against the emperor. But like you said, just letting a little of that humanity come out in those last Return of the Jedi lines earlier in the movie. "It's too late for me, my son." Right? But then in that, just for, Luke says, "But you'll die. Nothing can stop that now. Just for once, let me look on you with my own eyes." I'm going to honor James Earl Jones by not doing a bad Darth Vader impression in this moment. But Paul, I wanted to ask you, this is somewhat of a tangent, but so you said that, so you spent 1980 to 1983 believing that Darth Vader was lying.
Correct.
How did you react when Yoda confirmed to Luke Skywalker and you when Luke's like, "Is Vader my father?" And Yoda doesn't want to tell him, and he says, "Yoda, I must know." And Yoda like sighs and says, "Your father he is." Yeah. And you get the Darth Vader theme. How did that hit you, Mr. Paul Hyde?
Yeah, well, I knew I was going to be hearing a whole lot of "I told you so's," so that part was painful. But I actually did love it as part of the story, and was happy to be wrong for the sake of the story itself. And when I say I didn't believe it, I wasn't just so adamant about it. It's just that's how I walked out of the theater, thinking he was just trying to trick Luke into coming over to the dark side by saying that he's Luke's father, when he actually did kill Luke's father, as Obi-Wan told him. And, as a third grader with limited life experience, I didn't understand the concept either of why Obi-Wan would have held back that important information, and so also to me it was kind of a conflict of, are you going to believe Darth Vader or are you going to believe Obi-Wan? Are you going to believe the Jedi or the Sith? That seems like a no-brainer right there, But I still knew in my head I could be wrong. They might be right, and he might be Luke's father, but that's not how I walked out of the theater. So I kind of hung on to it, as much as I could, but not just sitting there going, you'll see, 100% you're wrong. He's a liar. Vader's a liar. He's evil. That's what he does. He lies. He destroys, he kills, and he's trying so hard to pull Luke over because he needs Luke so bad, on the dark side, that he would say anything to try to pull him over. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't even 100% convinced myself. So when it just got slapped in my face that I was completely wrong the whole time, I thought, it wasn't a huge deal, other than some of my good friends that I'd argued with for the last 3 years were absolutely going to go, see there? See, I told you. I told you that he really was.
As all good friends should do.
Yeah, exactly.
That's hilarious. Well, but it's interesting. Who knows how much of these behind-the-scenes legends and fables are actually true, but I remember hearing at one point that when George came up with the idea of Darth Vader being revealed as Luke's father, because, fun fact, it was not the plan. It was not the plan, but we'll get into all that a whole other time, right? When he came up with that idea, one of the first things he did was he met with a couple child psychologists, and he was like, am I going to traumatize any of these kids that love this movie? And basically what they said was, no, the ones that would be hurt by it will probably just not believe it's real. Mm. And so that's not me trying to call out third grader Paul Hyde of, haha, you couldn't handle it. But like, supposedly that's what George, that if he had heard that this was going to like hurt kids, he'd have been like, okay, then we're just not going to do it. We'll do something else, Well, cool. So, but it bears mentioning that no, I am your father. That moment doesn't work without that line reading and without that voice from James Earl Jones.
Oh, yeah.
As for, my favorite moments, I really do. Fun fact, I don't like the dad joke in Rogue One.
I love it. I think it's so great.
Hope you don't, be careful you don't choke on your aspirations, director. And he's like looking over his like shoulder. He might as well be going waka waka. I was just like, come on. Because like there's definitely moments of humor in Vader. It's important that because like, apology accepted, Captain Nita. Like, sure, there's been things like that. But my favorite moments, it is too late for me, son. That sticks out in a big way. Just to give love to something not original trilogy, Star Wars Rebels. I forget what Ahsoka says to Vader because that was also voiced by James Earl Jones. I forget what she says that tees him up, but she's like, I'm not afraid, or I'm not backing down, or something, and Vader just looks at her and says, then you will die braver than most. It's just like, oh, that's so good!
Vader always gets the hardest lines, It's just like, drop the mic,
Well, but I said it before, it's there's so many things that they kind of accidentally got right in this character, right? And I say accidentally because in that same AFI interview that I found and I shared on social media, James Earl Jones was saying that when George cast David Prowse, who was a world, or at least he was either world champion or like British champion bodybuilder, this huge, well over 6 feet tall, just mountain of a man who had this really, in my opinion, ridiculous, like just high-pitched Scottish voice. Not intimidating at all. You can see some clips where like, and find the passengers, I want them alive. And if like that was it, it'd be like, I don't know, man. And that's who George thought he wanted. And then he said, well, let's try and find a deeper, more richer voice that supposedly originally he wanted Orson Welles.
Ooh,
but going back, that would have been super cool. But also going back to what we talked about last week, Zach, that George was intentional in not casting stars. right? For things that he wanted you to hear Darth Vader. He didn't want to hear Orson Welles. So, and thank God, because who knows what James Earl Jones's career would or would not have been if a generation of people didn't grow up hearing him give one of the most iconic villain performances of all time, right? But then I thought it was interesting. So, because supposedly he recorded all of his dialogue for Star Wars Episode 4 in like 2 hours. He
doesn't have a lot of lines in that movie,
He doesn't. And that trivia is going to come back in a little bit for Paul. But that it was about 2 hours, and then 3 years go by, and when supposedly the legend goes, when they were filming Empire Strikes Back, David Prowse, now mad that they weren't using his voice, was kind of just not caring and was just giving very flat line readings and whatever. And so Irvin Kershner went in and redubbed the voice, the director of Empire Strikes Back, and that he was making all these like weird, big choices and stuff. And then that was when because James Earl Jones started to do that, and George came in and was like, no, stop. We got to do what we did last time. What makes him scary is you give the audience as little as possible. Give them nothing to go off of so they can project all of their own fears onto Vader and stuff. But that only happens it takes a good actor to be able to make that interesting, and James Earl Jones always made that interesting. Mm-hmm. So anything else to say about Mr. Jones before we move into our interview with Paul and kind of figure out some more deets about him as a Star Wars fan and what Star Wars means to him? Any other things that we got to say about James Earl Jones?
He will be missed.
Right on. Anything else, Paul?
Nope.
Right on.
All
okay.
Right.
So we're going to move on to the interview portion. So for fans of the show, I think this is episode 7 or episode 8?
Episode 8.
For episode 8, all 7 episodes so far, we've done several of these interviews, and we're going to keep with this format for a little bit until we get bored and come up with something else. Mm-hmm. But so all these same questions to figure out the same things about our friends and their Star Wars fandom. But Paul, first question, to get a little bit of that original trilogy perspective that I am excited about, I want to steer into, where were you when you first saw Star Wars, or what is your first Star Wars memory?
So my first Star Wars memory is sitting down at the movie theater. I honestly can't really remember seeing trailers on TV. I'm sure I did. But I was 6 years old when Star Wars came out. So I had just finished kindergarten, and and I tell people frequently, I say, I'm like the absolute perfect Star Wars age. I'm like, if you're a couple of years younger than me, no. If you're a couple of years more older than me, you're still not right there in that little narrow window that I was in and my friends as well, to just be the absolute perfect age for Star Wars. Because as I said, 1977, May 25th, 1977, Star Wars is released. And as I said, I just finished kindergarten. So I have no memories of sitting down in a movie theater ever prior to that. My family would occasionally go to drive-ins, which we don't have anymore around very much, although we do still have one right here in Granbury. Almost right across the street from where Matt's at.
It's true.
But, just down the road. But, that was probably any movie that my parents had tried to take me to prior to that was a sit down in a movie theater movie, I probably wouldn't have sat there and watched, and probably would have been a pain in the ass sitting there as a little kid, as you know, trying to get a kid to sit still during a movie. But 6 years old, probably borderline whether I could sit still through a whole movie or not. And I went to see it right here in Granbury, right just down from the drive-in. Matt, for people that know Granbury, lots of people don't, but there's a building right there, a very small building that was at the time the brand new cinema. That was all Granbury had, was the drive-in theater and the one screen cinema theater.
Wow.
And so I went there to see the movie, And I can remember just being blown away, even as a 6-year-old, and just absolutely loving the movie. Because prior to that, sci-fi was kind of cheesy, that it was, poor special effects. You see some little spaceship and you can see the strings it's hanging off of. It's just, somebody moving it across a black backdrop or something along those lines. It was just not very cool. It was pretty cheesy. Every sci-fi movie just about prior to that. And so the technology that you were seeing that we just take for granted now was just absolutely incredible. The things that George Lucas was doing to make that movie and to make it so realistic. But yeah, I walked out of that movie as a 6-year-old changed, right? And from that point on, the rest of my life, I am a Star Wars kid, and it was different than it is now, when you could get the VHS tapes and just watch them over and over. We didn't even have VHS then, I don't remember exactly when it was, but I can say that of all of my friends, I was the first that I knew that had a VCR at our house. And you couldn't just go out to the store and buy VHS tapes either. Granbury didn't even have a video rental store. I remember when we first had our VCR, there was a video rental store in Fort Worth over by Ridgemore Mall that my dad, being an airline pilot, sometimes when he was coming home from DFW to Granbury, he would stop off there and pick up a couple of tapes to rent for the weekend or for the week to take back, when he was back on his way to work. But that was also my dad picking up what movies he wanted. He wanted to see that he wanted us kids to see. So, I can't remember when I first saw Star Wars again, like on VHS, but it was not any time immediate. It wasn't like, the movie came out and then a few months later you could go rent it and go home and watch it 30 times in a row. You saw Star Wars and then you waited 3 years to see Empire Strikes Back, that kind of a thing. Not even being 100% sure when it was going to come out. But I did watch the Star Wars Holiday Special live.
Oh, no.
On TV.
What were your thoughts on that?
What's funny is I look back on it now and I go, oh my gosh, like this is so horrible. As a 7-year-old who loved everything Star Wars, I loved it. So, I truly have to admit that, like, I didn't watch that show going, oh, this is so bad, and this is going to go down in history as just a complete embarrassment for George Lucas and the entire Star Wars franchise. I was watching it going, I don't care. I'm watching Star Wars on my TV at home, and it's absolutely amazing. So I love all of it, no matter how cheesy it is, no matter how... You guys have seen it. You know how bad it is. But
fun fact, I have actually never watched it through top to bottom. It's actually something I would like to do for the podcast. We might do a commentary track this holiday season.
It's
not a bad
tough.
idea. Yeah.
I'm sure. And I've seen most of it.
Push through. Yeah.
Paul, I have
awesome.
just to tangent. Do you remember your thoughts when they were like, "Hey, A New Hope is actually episode 4"? Do you remember that happening? And what was your perspective on that?
I don't remember the specifics. I could be wrong. Okay, and I know you guys are without a question more Star Wars experts than I am. So you can tell me if this is correct. But what I'm thinking is, like y'all know, without a doubt, it did not say episode 4, A New Hope.
Right.
It was just Star Wars. Starts off the wonderful and a long time ago in a galaxy far away, and then it's Star Wars, and then it starts to scroll. And then, like I said, you don't see anything until now it's time to go see Empire Strikes Back. And if I remember right, that was the first time that I saw, episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. And my friends and all of us said, well, what are they talking about? Did I miss did I miss 3 shows in between, 3 movies in between Star Wars and this new one that I'm going to go see right now? Because there was Star Wars, and then now we're at episode 5. Where were
Yeah.
2, 3, and 4? But I remember us talking about it as kids, and saying, what was that about? And I had a friend, my very best friend when I was a kid was a kid named Todd Robbins, and still in contact with him today. He's an airline pilot up in Atlanta, but he studied Star Wars more than I did, and he had everything Star Wars. He was an only child on top of it. So whereas, like I said, I thought I was poor when I was growing up. There were 4 kids in my family, and I thought we were poor, and I realize now we were not. But Todd was an only child, and he got all of the coolest toys and all of the coolest stuff, and he had all the Star Wars toys. And he would follow more than I did the comics, the books. There were always these books being put out, and there were all these comics coming out, and then there was always a question. Some of those books and comics would be written like as sequels to Star Wars. And you'd be going, we'd be talking about maybe this one's going to be the next movie, or maybe this one's going to be the next movie. He knew all about that stuff more so than I did. And I remember he and I talking about it. And I think it was Todd that told me then, this is going to be a trilogy. And for some reason, he's doing it as 4, 5, and 6. And then that's going to be it. And then I think it was only when Jedi came out that Todd told me they're going to come back and they're going to do 1, 2, and 3. And that's why he did 4, 5, and 6. And I don't remember where Todd read that, because, like I said, back then you couldn't hop on the internet and talk to a lot of other fans and share this information. It just wasn't available. And so I think it was Todd that told me that. But it was, I do vaguely recall seeing Empire Strikes Back and just kind of going, what the hell is that? Episode 5.
Yeah. What a whiplash, like what?
Yeah, because it's didn't start.
Can you imagine if something like that happened today? If the
People
next
would
Star Wars
riot.
movie comes out and it's episode 15 or something.
Right.
What is this? What are you doing? They're ruining Star Wars. Okay, sorry.
And that's honestly one of those things that, like I said, just yell at me if I start sounding like a crotchety old man. But that is one of the things that bothered me a little bit throughout this time period. Even after the trilogies were long over, these re-releases and changing things in the movies. And I didn't like that. I never did like that. It's like the whole, did Han shoot first? Well, let's just change it, that kind of a thing. And when you're watching something, unless you're just like, a super fan, really up on the trivia like you guys are, you don't necessarily know these changes have been made. And that wasn't in the original, and it wasn't that way in the original. And like y'all know, there are lots of those modifications that have been made to the 3 original trilogies through the years.
Yeah.
And that annoys me a little bit.
I'm all there for them re-releasing the original.
Yeah.
I think it would also easy sell, easy money. Like put it out as a DVD. That's gonna make millions.
It would be huge. One of the biggest things against it is I think that I don't know if those film prints exist anymore. Part of the reason for re-releasing the special editions was, number one, to test the market. Of course, to see if they could do the prequels, if Star Wars was still the big thing that it had been before. But the other one was they wanted to restore the original film prints so that they weren't just lost to time. Like they were eroding quite literally. So they might not exist. You can find some like non-official things. There's a project called 4K 77, which is supposedly a restoration of the original 1977 film in 4K. There are still changes that have been made that are unavoidable. But yeah, there's that George Lucas quote that apparently at some point became his mantra, where he heard that, I don't know who the filmmaker was, but somebody once told him, well, films are never completed, they are only abandoned. And he decided that he wanted to keep changing them as much as he wanted because, as we like to say on this podcast, I'm George Lucas.
Yeah.
We're gonna change it. We're gonna make it the way I want. I'm George Lucas. Do it.
Yeah, I'm not even sure when I remember that hearing that there was even going to be another movie after Star Wars. Because it kind of
cool.
wraps up right there, right? And
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, Star Wars was a more of a finality ending that had there never been any others, it didn't leave on a cliffhanger or anything like that. Like Empire, when Empire ends, there's going to be another one, and at that point we knew it was going to be a trilogy anyway. But I don't think we knew that whenever Star Wars was made. And I don't know, you guys would know, but I don't know if George Lucas knew for sure there was going to be another one. People were making when they were filming that movie. Like actors say all the time, they were sitting there going, "I don't know about this. I don't know if this will work or not. This is crazy."
Yeah.
But George likes to say things, and who knows what's true and what's not. But one of the things that we do know was that he waived his director's fee to get the merchandising rights for himself, and then also to get for sure written like in print that he had the rights to make the 2 sequels.
Yeah.
Okay.
What wasn't clear was whether or not they were going to be big budget movies, right? Like the first one was, or big budget, right? Or if they were going to be made for TV things. But he made sure of that. He made very, very little money off of the first movie until he started making toys. And then all the the action figures started coming out and it went nuts.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway,
that was brilliant too, as you know. I mean, that was not an industry that existed prior.
Right.
That's why he was able to get it. They would have never let him have it if some modern director wanted that, because they know the value in it, and they didn't know the value in it at that time. You didn't have those kind of merchandising and toys, and it just completely took over. As a kid, that was all we wanted for Christmas, for our birthdays. It was Star Wars stuff.
Yeah.
Which is just wild. But all right, Zach, hit him with this next one.
Yeah,
it's a fantastic tangent. But
Yeah, thank you. So who is your favorite Star Wars hero?
As lame and predictable, I guess, as sound, it is just Luke Skywalker.
Yes, sir.
I love them all, but again, as a kid, Luke was just really somebody to look up to and admire. And you love Han's cockiness, and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, Han was a criminal before he became a rebel hero, an officer in the rebel army. But he was interesting. It was fun. They were all fun characters. But Luke was somebody to look up to and admire. And just through that trilogy, you saw just a progression of him being the naive farm boy. If you equated it to today, he's living on a cornfield in Kansas, in some little bitty town in Kansas. And he's just a farmer who dreams about going out to New York City or Hollywood or wherever and going out and finding his way, bigger, better things. But he's stuck on this little farm. And, that's an age-old tale, but applied to Star Wars with him there on Tatooine. And then you see him progress into, fulfilling this prophecy basically that he doesn't know anything about, that he doesn't know that he's part of until he's basically a young adult. And then kind of the awkwardness and clumsiness through that. And then in Jedi, he's this polished, dark robe, speaks very calmly and cool, and he knows his power, and he doesn't have to be braggadocious or loud. It's just, I am a badass. I am a Jedi like my father. And, when if I'm here to get something, I'm walking out with it. Like when he walked into Jabba's place. It's like, I don't care. I'm here by myself, but whatever I came in here for, I'm leaving with. And he's basically just going to state that as calmly and coolly as you can. And it's just a good example for a young kid of when you have that kind of power, you don't have to flaunt it. You don't have to be arrogant with it, and you just calmly and powerfully speak your mind. And Vader did it before him, and then Luke became that. And so seeing that whole evolution of Luke from A New Hope to Return of the Jedi, I just love that. And so as a kid, again, this is all from a child's perspective, obviously, because that covered my life from the age of 6 until the age of 12. But that was he was a real role model for me, I guess you'd say. So that's my favorite.
Nice.
No, man, no shame. I think we would both agree that Luke is at least one of, if not our favorites. He's still the guy. He's still the guy for sure. But so the flip side of the coin, Paul, who is your favorite Star Wars villain?
And again, I'm just going to embarrass myself with the stereotypical that all the true Star Wars fans will just be laughing at me for, or the guys that really know their stuff. It's Vader. Vader, just as a kid, again, just scary, just terrifying. Everything about him, the way he moved, the way if you just slightly angered him in the least bit, it's like, I can just choke you from here, and if you don't give me the answer I need, the lines like, you guys would know the exact line, but I have altered our deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
You got it.
That kind of evil, and then as he progresses through that evil, and then as you do learn that he, like I didn't realize, truly was Luke's father, but was also Leia's father, and that Luke and Leia were twins. And then seeing the vulnerability of him the first time they remove his helmet, and you're like, oh my God, that's a seriously damaged human inside that machine right there, physically, just terribly, terribly damaged. And then, like we were talking about earlier, the humanity at the very end, where he saves his son's life, where he kills the Emperor to save his son. And it's not like he's been Dad of the Year prior to that. He cut his own hand off, right? He spent 2 movies trying to kill his son or pull him over to the dark side, one or the other. It's like, you're either going to join me or you're going to eventually die. But seeing that humanity at the very end. And then, of course, many, many years later, really seeing the humanity when you see him as a child, and the upbringing that he had, and the emotional damage that he suffered, that just shows, and throughout Star Wars, there's all this, just like y'all know, it's the good versus evil, it's the light versus the dark, it's the everything in balance, and the Force, and the way everything's connected, and the whole balance of that. And that very few people, I shouldn't say nobody, but very few people are completely good, and very few people are completely bad, and seeing that humanity in Vader at the very end, that's just so it's just, as cliche as it is, it's just Luke, my favorite hero, and Darth is my favorite villain.
It's not cliche when it's completely valid,
Yeah. Man, there's nothing wrong with the hits. You know what I mean? Star Wars wouldn't exist without the hits.
I mean, Darth Vader might be the best villain of all time, so, totally okay. Moving on, who is your favorite random alien and or background character, Cantina-esque random little guys?
I mean, there's so much good stuff. You love the Cantina band from the very beginning.
Yeah.
That's just good music, and and those guys are just great. And one of the things as a kid, when, like I said, you just wanted Star Wars stuff for Christmas, for your birthdays. That's all you wanted. And so my parents would buy me some of that stuff, not anywhere the amount that Todd Robbins got, he got it all, but I would get this stuff. And my parents knew nothing about Star Wars. They'd take us to the movies, but they didn't care. They didn't know anything about. And so sometimes you get these action figures even. It's good that on the original packaging, they would usually show a picture of this droid or this alien in the movie. Otherwise, you really oftentimes wouldn't even know who that was because they were such a little side character, right? And so, like, one of my favorites as a droid has always been FX7. And I can tell you, I remember getting this little droid for Christmas one year right after Empire Strikes Back. And even first opening the present up, looking at the package and going, what droid is that? And then thankfully you see a picture of it beside Luke when Luke's in that liquid chamber recovering from his, from Han saving him out there in the frozen wasteland of Hoth. And this little droid is just right there beside that chamber where Luke's enclosed in all that liquid working on him. And so that's the only time. I mean, I think that there were probably other times when this droid came on film later, but this is certainly the first time that it showed up. And when I first opened the package, if you had not shown me the package immediately where I saw the scene and you said, where was that? I would have said, I don't remember seeing that one. But it's mine. My parents bought it for me. It was a Christmas present along with some of my other ones. And so I love that one. And so I love that droid right there. But again, it just shows the brilliance of George Lucas and all of the marketing team and merchandising team, that they were smart enough also to, if anything appears on that screen, even for like 2 seconds, we are going to make an action figure and kids are going to buy it no matter what. And so I had several of these as a kid that were just like very obscure characters, and I've always loved those. And then this person doesn't count as an alien because he was on his home planet, but I've always loved Wicket Warwick, of course.
Yeah.
Get into Ewoks. And, loved that character when I saw Jedi. But at the same time, later on, when some of this stuff starts coming out, and you can see stuff on TV and see stuff about the different characters, learn all this different stuff, learning that Wicket Warwick was played by Warwick Davis, who was the same age as me, who's basically the same age as me, and hearing the story of how he's just a little kid that's a Star Wars fan himself, that like every kid of my age just loves Star Wars. And so he's this 11-year-old fan of Star Wars, and his aunt saw something about a casting call to be in the next Star Wars, and they were looking for short people to be in the movie, and I think his aunt called, and they said, well, we're not looking for anybody else. We've got all the spots filled. But then when they found out that Warwick was only like 3 feet tall, then they did have an interest in him and brought him out there. And even then, if I read correctly, he's supposed to be just kind of one of the minor characters of the Ewoks. But Kenny Baker, who played R2-D2, was going to be the Ewok that had that encounter with Leia and all of that, and became, and Kenny Baker had food poisoning the day they were supposed to film that, and so they asked little Warwick Davis to step up and fill that role. So he comes in as an 11-year-old kid, and just immediately, because of Kenny Baker having food poisoning, gets a major role in that movie as one of the main Ewoks. And that's a pretty amazing story also. And like I said, you can see those pictures of George Lucas gave Warwick a complete set of like all of the Star Wars figures and pictures of him sitting there playing with them on set and that kind of stuff. And I'm just thinking, man, I would go be 3 feet tall if I could just be Warwick Davis and be in Jedi like that.
And he went on to have a really great career. It's still happening.
Yeah.
But he sent George a letter asking, like, thanks for letting me be in the movie. Will you please send me all of the Star Wars figures?
Right. And
that's
so
awesome.
Yeah, it's like just that kid perspective of being a super fan Star Wars, and then being able to get into that final movie of the trilogy and having that experience. And like, I saw an interview with Warwick Davis a few months ago where he said something like, Star Wars is part of my life every single day. There's not a day goes by that Star Wars is not part of my life, whether it's working on something, whether it's being interviewed, there's not a day goes by when Star Wars doesn't affect his life, and he's very proud of his work in Star Wars, as he should be. And like I said, he went on to a good, really, really impressive career after that.
And he's been in almost every Star Wars since.
Yeah,
As random people,
Yeah, I remember episode 1. He's right there with Anakin's.
You got it.
No.
I was trying to cue you. Watto.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Betting on the pod races. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
Alrighty. So Paul, if you had a lightsaber, if you, Paul Hyde, had a Jedi weapon, what color would it be?
Well, I mean, I will tell you this, like, for my own lightsabers, if I had to choose one, I would probably just go with green. But, like, personally, I have two, and I think it's important. I think it's important to kind of, as I said, the duality of light. You kind of need both, right?
Yeah.
Different times call for different weapons. But if somebody made me choose one, and if it was actually going to be my weapon of choice as I go through life and face life's challenges and obstacles, I would go with the green, I guess.
Right on.
But that's another thing, is that lightsaber colors weren't really a thing, right? Until it was an accident more than anything. I mean, I think it was a good choice that right from the beginning, the evil's red, and that makes perfect sense. Red kind of draws those feelings out. So it was a great choice to have Vader have a red saber, but and blue's kind of an opposite of that. I mean, we see that. You got your red Republicans, your blue Democrats, this kind of thing. Those red and blue are kind of sort of opposite colors. We kind of think of them that way. But then at the same time, that whole lore of kyber crystals and what type of kyber crystal they have here and this kind of stuff, and leads to what kind of saber and all of that. Like you guys know, the truth is we only got a green saber because of that scene in Jedi where they're fighting on Jabba's transport there, and the blue was fading into the background to the sky behind them, and they go, we can't do that. Let's make the lightsaber green, and so they changed it to green. But the original promo posters showed the blue saber, and then it was green by the time the movie came out, because they had to make that change just because of that one scene. And then later on, as things become much more complicated and the whole lore of all these backstories start coming into everything, and all these different shows come out, they come out with all of this, what is it? What color? What does this color mean? What does this color mean? What is this? Really wasn't a thing in the original trilogies,
Right, right. That's
long
awesome.
way to say I'd stick with green if I had to.
Love it.
All right. So if you could have a Star Wars tattoo, what would it be? Or if you have a Star Wars tattoo, what is it?
I don't have a Star Wars tattoo because I only have one tattoo, and I have always thought about getting a Star Wars tattoo, just because it has been such a large part of my life, and was basically my entire childhood. But I think that if I actually was going to go down today and get a Star Wars tattoo, it would just probably be the Rebel symbol, because I like to be kind of vague, cover a whole lot of stuff. I had a phone case for a long time. Now I've got a Vader phone case, but for a long time I had a phone case and a pop here that had the Rebel symbol right there. And I kind of liked it because the Star Wars fans always saw it immediately And the people that weren't Star Wars fans, I remember I had a client in my office one day, and he saw it, and he was like, "Oh, so you're a big Waylon Jennings fan?" And I was like, "No, I mean I like Waylon Jennings, okay, but no, I wouldn't say I'm some Waylon Jennings fan. Why do you say that?" He was like, "Oh, you got the like Waylon Jennings symbol on the back of your phone." I was like, "No, that's the Rebel Alliance right there." So I'd probably go with something like that. I've got some friends that have got amazing tattoos, Star Wars tattoos, but I've always thought about it, but never have pulled the trigger on it. So.
Right on. So, Paul, in or out of universe, what is your favorite Star Wars story?
Star Wars stories that I like to tell, I guess. And I'm not a great storyteller, but y'all probably know. There was a time period for several years where Peter Mayhew lived here in Granbury.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He and his wife and his stepdaughter lived here. My head paralegal, Wayne Baker, went to high school with his stepdaughter. But it was known that Peter Mayhew was living here in Granbury. And one time in 2002, I was having lunch with my now wife. I think we were just dating at the time. And we're eating out of the Chinese buffet here in Granbury. And we're sitting at the table, and in comes walking Peter Mayhew and his wife. And I just was like, "Oh my God." And I'm telling Stephanie, look. And she's like, "What?" She goes, who is that? That big, tall, hippie-looking guy. And I was like, "That's Peter Mayhew. That's Chewbacca." And I knew he was living in Granbury. He'd been in Granbury for several years at that time. But I'm sitting there going, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." I'm fangirling in a big way, basically. And that was also before we were all carrying around cameras everywhere we went. So I'm seeing him there, and I'm going, how do I approach him? I don't want to bother him. I don't want to be that guy. But I got to talk to, if I'm in the same room with Chewbacca and don't talk to him, I'll be regretting this for the rest of my life. So I waited until he went up to the buffet to start filling his plate. And I just kind of casually go up there and grab a plate and kind of nonchalantly like slide up next to him like I'm just waiting to get some food right behind him. And I kind of just, in a real low voice, I go, "Excuse me, Mr. Mayhew, I don't want to bother you while you're eating lunch, and I really apologize for bothering you here, but I just want to tell you that I'm just a huge fan, and I just love Star Wars and love your work as Chewbacca, and it's just really an honor for me to just even get to meet you. And I'm not going to ask you for an autograph or to pose for a picture or anything like that, but I just wanted to tell you just what a huge fan I am." And he was, of course, just nice as could be.
Oh, cool.
He was like, "Oh, well, thanks. I really appreciate that." And it's always great to hear from Star Wars fans. There's just so many of them around the world, and it's I never get tired of hearing from Star Wars fans. So thank you very much. And it's really nice to meet you as well. And then I just sat down, just kind of going, "Oh my God, I just met." Can't believe I just met Peter Mayhew. And then the other one that's not a specific story is when I'm talking about being the perfect age for Star Wars. I talk about how, like I said, when I was in kindergarten, Star Wars comes out and I go see it. And, me and all my friends, we're just, as little kids, we've also got this, girls are gross still, but Princess Leia, Princess Leia is so beautiful and wholesome, and she's got her, her buns on her hair and her beautiful white flowing robe, and that just becomes, your ideal of what a beautiful princess woman, should be. And so you have this crush on Princess Leia. I did. All of my friends did. And then you get a little bit older, and Empire Strikes Back comes out, and she looks a little different, but still beautiful Leia, and you've still got that crush. Matt kind of can tell where I'm going here.
I just realized where this is gonna go.
It's very predictable at this point. And then you reach the age of 12. in sixth grade, and you're seeing girls in a different way for the first time in your life, and you go to the movie theater to see Return of the Jedi, and right there beside Jabba the Hutt is Slave Leia, and this ideal woman that's been your crush for your entire childhood, basically. And now that you're seeing things a little different, is there like that, and your eyes are just bugging out of your head as oh wow, so, falls into that category of that very narrow time frame that you've got to be that exact age to appreciate all of those aspects of Star Wars. But Princess Leia is one of those. So Princess Leia, she'll always hold a special place in my heart, no matter how old I get. Very sad when Carrie Fisher died, of course.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, yeah, it's kind of funny. I guess I didn't really think about that. Princess Leia marked very meaningful moments in your childhood, and as you were growing up.
Right, from 6 to 12, which is that's mostly your childhood. And that's another thing I say about the age being just perfect, because truthfully, I think also right about that time, I was really looking, at other things, kind of, leaving toys and childhood behind. And I remember after seeing Return of the Jedi, again, my friend Todd Robbins, who seemed to know everything about Star Wars, he told me they're going to make those prequels trilogy. And they're not going to do it until we knew then it was going to be like 1988, 1999 or something like that. Because I remember thinking, I'm not even going to care about Star Wars. I'm going to be a boring grown-up at that point, and I'm going to care nothing about Star Wars anymore. And had they come out with those immediately, I might have not, if they'd have kept that every 3-year thing going for 1, 2, and 3, as I'm going through high school and college, and I'm into rock and roll and heavy metal, and I'm playing guitar in bands, and I'm doing all that kind of stuff, and I'm up to all kinds of no good. I probably would have lost interest, I think, in Star Wars during that time period, kind of like I abandoned Dungeons and Dragons during that time period as well for, a while, and thankfully came back to it. But then in 1999, when they're about to release Episode 1, it was kind of cool because at the time, I had a stepson from my first marriage that had just finished kindergarten. And, and I had showed him Star Wars from the time he was a baby, of course. And so he was really into the original trilogy. And I took him because 1999, that Granbury Cinema was actually still open here. And it was kind of towards the end of that movie theater. I took him to that same Granbury Cinema and sat down in what I remembered to be approximately the area I sat in to watch Star Wars. And we sat there and watched Episode 1 with him as a kindergartner and me as a 28-year-old watching Star Wars. And so that was pretty cool too.
That's awesome. Well,
that's fantastic.
That's a perfect lead into the next question. It's been a part of your life almost your whole life. So what does Star Wars mean to you?
Oh, it's everything, really. It's, because as y'all know, there's just so many wonderful life lessons in Star Wars. It's not just entertainment. And like I said, as a little kid, being a 6-year-old and then a 9-year-old and then a 12-year-old, seeing those trilogies, seeing the trilogy, learning things like that everything ties together, that we are all connected. I truly believe, as corny as it may sound, the Force really affected my generation, my friends, and how we looked at life. And you did take a lot of seriousness into that belief that we are all connected, that everything that you do has an effect somewhere else. It's not a new concept. It's like an ancient yin-yang theory, but it really brought it home, again, that there's good and there's bad in almost everyone, and everything really is in perfect balance and has to remain in perfect balance. Like, you can't knock it out of balance if you try to. the concept of, even the dark side understood that when they're trying to funnel all of their power into one or two people, and this understanding, and the Jedi have an equal power, but it's spread between many. And so, which of that really is in perfect balance, but which is the better way? Is it better to, if you've got, it's kind of like thinking about 250-pound weights or 10-pound weights, and that's kind of the dark side against the Jedi, the Sith against the Jedi. The Sith are concentrating in a very small population. The Jedis are trying to have more. And that just battle of good and evil, and you want to be on the good side. The dark side is fun and the villains are fun, but ultimately you don't want to be a villain, and it kind of doesn't work out for the villain in the end. Those are all just very good life lessons. And like I said, it truly was, I can't just overstate it enough. It was my childhood. And all of my friends, we studied the Force, we watched those movies, we waited for the next one, we talked about it. I can remember second grade, the most popular kid in school at recess was this kind of little goofy kid in our class that wouldn't have been popular, so to speak, but he had all of the coolest, he had all the Star Wars action figures, and for some reason he was allowed to bring them to school. And we played with his Star Wars action figures at recess. And if you made that kid mad, he wouldn't let you play with the Star Wars figures at recess. So everybody's going to be nice to him as well. And so, and kids, everybody was dressed up as Star Wars characters for Halloween. And that's, I can pull out my Christmas letter from second grade from the Hood County News newspaper, where the one thing that I'm asking for Christmas is I wanted a stormtrooper costume, but the helmet, not just the Halloween mask that stuck on your face and had a rubber band around the back of it, Yeah. But that's all I wanted was Star Wars action figures, Star Wars ships and vehicles, and costumes and lightsabers, even though the lightsabers were cheesy and not near as cool as we have right here. But I mean, this just popped in my head, and this is goofy, but again, talking about an old man, back in those days when you went up to a grocery store door, you had to open the door to walk into the grocery store. And I remember about that time, they came up with these automatic doors at the grocery store, David's Supermarket down the road here in Winn-Dixie. And but there was like a mat in front of the door that when you stepped on it, the door swung open. It wasn't just like a motion detection thing. But every kid I knew walking into the grocery store stepped up to the door, and went like this to make the door open. We're all using the Force, and it just really just dominated every aspect of your life. That Star Wars was everything. Mm-hmm. And there were other things going on, but it all tied back to Star Wars. And I do think it taught me a lot of good life lessons as a child. So I don't know.
That's right on. You do know, man. You said it all. That was awesome. This was so cool. Well, and it's funny because, I mean, I'm sure Zach can say the same thing. I've done that when I walk into the grocery store before. I didn't realize that, yeah, exactly. Ewan McGregor gave an interview about how he does that sometimes when he's out in public. And that the thing was that, like, every now and then he's like, he doesn't necessarily want people to notice that it's him doing it, but he wouldn't be opposed if they did. But I didn't realize that would have probably come around about the same time. That's kind of funny. So all the kids are like, oh, I'm using the Force like Luke Skywalker. But okay, so speaking of,
really, really quick, is we were also Muppet kids, all right, watching Sesame Street. Prior to Star Wars, when I'm home during the day before I even started kindergarten, I'm watching on TV in the mornings while my older brothers are at school. I'm watching Mr. Rogers, The Electric Company, and Sesame Street. And so the fact that George Lucas got Frank Oz involved. From what I understand, he tried to get Jim Henson first, and Jim Henson was just too busy, and he said, "Get Frank." And Frank was able to do it, and and like y'all know, Frank came up with Yoda, and voiced Yoda, and so that's another tie-in to my childhood. In that, when I first heard Yoda talk, you can kind of hear Miss Piggy and Fozzie Bear in that Yoda voice, all right? Because Frank Oz was doing all that, and Yoda was basically just a Muppet, as was the little rat jester that Jabba had in Return of the Jedi, beside him, that was like laughing and everything like that. And so, that's that other tie-in for kids my age, is you're already watching Sesame Street and the Muppets before Star Wars even comes out, and then it does end up with a Muppet Frank Oz tie-in as well. So anyway.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, okay. So, speaking of tying in this lifelong love of Star Wars, Paul, we have reached the ridiculous Rathtar question. This is the high-stakes medal round trivia challenge. But either way you win. Because either you know this ridiculous piece of trivia, and it's different for everybody, and it's always silly. Or you don't know it, and congratulations, that does mean that you do, in fact, have a life. So, speaking of James Earl Jones, speaking of the original Star Wars film, all of these things. So I'm going to give you, this is an over-under question. In terms of the minutes of screen time for Darth Vader in Star Wars Episode 4, is it over or under 12 minutes?
I'm going to say barely under.
Wow. You got it right. It is literally 11 minutes and 30 seconds.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know if it was going to be too obvious. That's it.
I
And
did not know that.
We talked about it earlier, that it was one of the last edits made on that first Star Wars film was George going, wait, this Vader guy's kind of interesting. Let's make sure we get a shot in there of him kind of like spinning back into frame and escaping after the Death Star has exploded, because he's like, I don't know, that mask is pretty cool. Maybe we did something good. Let's have him come back. Maybe it'll matter later. But cool, yay! Congratulations. That is the.
Thanks.
I think you're the second guest to get a Rathtar right. So we're 2 out of 4 right now. Zach, I got to come up with harder questions. Well, we got to come up with harder questions.
And we'll eventually have a pin, and we'll send it to you. So again, if you have any art on our ridiculous Rathtar, let us know. We're looking to make pins.
I will put that in a place of honor with all my other Star Wars stuff. That if you walk into my office, truly, like there really is just Star Wars stuff, along with other stuff all over the place.
I've seen it. It's the coolest. Well, okay. So, Paul, if you have a couple minutes, I'd like to seek out your law expertise in this moment. Okay. Zach, do you want to set this up, or shall I?
Yeah, I can do it. So
Hit it.
It came out this week that Disney is getting sued by a man who was Peter Cushing's friend. He claims that Peter Cushing gave him the rights to approve his likeness, but he was not reached out to by Disney when they did the Rogue One Peter Cushing recreation of the face, which is interesting because I remember when it was first happening that they said they reached out to Peter Cushing's estate and it was approved, but maybe it was just a miscommunication on who had the rights. Paul, what are your thoughts on the likeness of Peter Cushing and being sued?
It's a really, really interesting subject because, it's one of those things like through the years, there have been a lot of legal issues within the entertainment business when contracts are entered into and this further thing in the future is not even thought of. And, as you know, it's led to a lot of people, frankly, getting screwed in a lot of different things. When the Little Rascals way back in the day are making their little shorts that just show in movie theaters before the main feature, and Hal Roach is putting that together and paying these kids, and he's paying them for the work that they do. There's no thought at all at the time that these are going to be aired over and over and over again in syndication on TV. TV didn't exist at that time, and suddenly these kids are getting their all of their work is being broadcast over and over again, and they're continuing to make all kinds of money off of it, and there's nothing for those kids because it wasn't in their contract. Well, it wasn't even contemplated at the time that it was a possibility. And we're dealing with that now, as you guys know, with so much on AI, that we are very close to being able to just create any character we want and put them in a movie, and it could be an exact likeness of somebody. And we could put Matt Beutner starring in a movie and have him never have to lift a finger or do anything, and possibly just completely steal that. So you've got all these legal issues, and here in my own law business, we always kid around when something comes into our office that's some really strange, lots of different issues connected kind of an issue, and we'll say, that is a law school exam question right there. You get all these kind of weird scenarios when you're in law school. When you sit down to take a final exam, they're almost all essay exams, and no matter what the class is, and there's whole big crazy scenarios laid out, and you've got to identify all the different issues and then apply the law to them, and explain everything. And that's what I thought of when I first heard about this case right here. Is I thought, you got intellectual property rights here. You've got the likeness to use somebody's image and voice. You've got contract questions here. Who does own that right? You've got probate questions here, and it's all tied together because, I don't know, I don't want to bore y'all too much with too much legal stuff, but when I die and my will leaves like everything to my wife or everything to my kids, however it goes, part of that process is, I put in my will that the rest and residue of my estate goes to, and I indicate who gets my assets. And as part of the probate process through the courts, the executor that's in charge of making sure the different assets go to the right people, whoever that is, or right person, makes an inventory of what all these assets consist of. You don't, when you make your will, you don't sit there and say every single item you own. I leave my red lightsaber to Matt Beutner, and I leave my green lightsaber to Zachary Turner, and I leave my truck here, and I leave my Les Paul guitar to this person. I can do that. I can individually leave stuff, but you don't name every single piece of property that you own. You just say, here's who I leave my assets to, and the executor creates an inventory of what those assets consist of and goes to the court with it, and then the judge gives you an order to be able to distribute those assets to everybody. It's not previously been thought of as a real asset. Back up 20, 30, 40 years ago, you're not going to have your image and likeness necessarily and your voice being an asset that you specifically leave to somebody in a will. But we've got this question right here of this friend of Peter Cushing's coming up and saying, I have the rights to that because of some agreement they made for, I don't know, a movie or a TV show that Peter Cushing was going to be doing with this guy. And that was signed in tell me if I'm wrong, but like in 1994 and 1996 is when Peter Cushing died or something like that. I think somewhere around those dates. But, I don't have any doubt that Lucasfilms, they are not so stupid that they would go in and take something that they didn't have a right to and say, well, we'll just deal with this later if it comes up in court or if anybody sues. They're going to make sure they've got all the rights. And it's a perfectly logical conclusion to come to that if I want to use somebody's likeness in a film after they've passed away, I'm going to go to the executors of this person's estate and work a deal with them. And apparently that's what happened. Maybe because of Peter Cushing's original contract, Lucasfilms definitely believed they had the right to continue to use that image and likeness. even on much later dates, and that's what they did. But then I also read something like, but they still went ahead and paid Peter Cushing's estate like $33,000 for that usage, and so they paid for it as well. And then suddenly this guy comes up, much later and says, no, I have the rights to that, and he files a lawsuit. Now, you might have seen on a news report on it that the judge in the case, and it's in England, so that's a whole other different type of law, but the judge in the case said, we are going to allow this to go to trial. He does not feel very strongly that this person has a right to Peter Cushing's image, that's claiming it, and that he has a case, but there are things that need to be decided at trial. That sounds to me very similar to something here in America that's called a motion for summary judgment. And if Matt Boitner files a lawsuit against me, and I look at that lawsuit, and it's basically completely without merit, all right? And I can file what's called a motion for summary judgment. And what I'm doing when I file that is I'm basically going to the court and I'm saying, even if you believe everything that Matt says in his pleadings, there's nothing to decide here. He doesn't have a case. Okay. And so, it's really just to take frivolous lawsuits and just flush them out right from the start before they cost too much money or too much of the court's time, things like that. So you file a motion for summary judgment when you're basically doing that. You're telling the court, you're asking the judge to dismiss the case because there's nothing to decide here. Even if you believe everything the plaintiff has filed in their original petition, filing the lawsuit, they still don't have a case. And so if a judge looks at it and thinks there's anything that a jury could decide here, if there's anything that is justiciable, then they're going to let it go to trial. They're going to let these people have their day in court. But I find it telling that the judge would, because normally a judge is either just going to grant the motion for summary judgment and the case is dismissed, or he's going to deny it and then it's just going to carry on through the process. But I found it interesting that the judge basically, I've never seen this before, where the judge comes out and says, I'm going to let this go to trial, but I don't think you guys have a chance, is basically what he said. He's already stated his opinion right there that there's not much to it. But even, because the other thing is this, there's also something that is allowed for in the law that, as we know, Lucasfilms did pay for Peter Cushing's. The only question is, did he pay the wrong people or not?
Yeah.
And this friend of Peter Cushing's that has this company has sued not only Lucasfilm, but has sued the executors of the estate, from what I understand, as one of the defendants in that case, because Lucasfilms does have the defense of saying, we paid for this usage and it was completely reasonable to think that we paid the right person for it.
Yeah.
So if anything, if that was a mistake, then this friend of Peter Cushing's maybe does have a claim. Even if Peter Cushing's friend has the right to that, and if his lawsuit is actually valid, his case is not against Lucasfilm necessarily. It's against the executors of the estate, because they basically collected money for an asset, a right that they didn't actually own. And so that's going to be the argument, is this person saying, I own the rights to Peter Cushing's likeness, and that was incorrectly used, and Lucasfilm saying, we paid who we were supposed to pay. So there's no argument with us whatsoever. Your fight is not with us, and if anything, go get your money from the person that actually received the money, and not come to us. And as long as Lucasfilm's belief that they were paying the right person or people is reasonable, then they're probably going to be let off the lawsuit, even if it continues against the executors. like y'all know, celebrities, many celebrities make more in death than they ever did in life.
Yeah.
The estate of Elvis Presley makes a ton of money, and same with George Harrison from the Beatles and John Lennon and all of those guys. Their estates are making tons of money. But so you've got that issue, you've got the contract issue, you've got the probate issue, but then, now as you get even further, you've got these questions of when can you use somebody's likeness? And I remember reading, I think in law school, about Crispin Glover, from Back to the Future, who played the dad, who played George McFly in Back to the Future. And he had something where he was in Back to the Future, and then they were getting ready to make Back to the Future 2. And Crispin Glover's kind of an eccentric guy to begin with, and he didn't like that script, and he didn't want to be in Back to the Future 2. And so he actually made a very high money demand, like $1 million to be in Back to the Future 2, I think it was, which was pretty unheard of at the time, especially for a kind of a secondary character in the movie. And so, of course, they just said, no, we're not going to pay you $1 million to be in Back to the Future 2. And they brought in an actor that looks similar to Crispin Glover, but then they even put like makeup and prosthetics on him to look more like Crispin Glover. And so Crispin Glover sued over that because they're taking his likeness. And then the question comes, none of these actors own their characters, so to speak, right? Like I think it's without question that George Lucas and Lucasfilms and the various subsidiaries own Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader and all of that. They own those characters. They own that intellectual property. But if Mark Hamill chooses not to be in a movie and they need to have Luke Skywalker, or they just don't bring him in, they don't want him, or they can't come to an agreement with him, how similar can his replacement look to him before it becomes something where the actor himself or herself is owed money? You think about all these TV shows where, for various reasons, characters just completely change, and it's the same character, but it's a different person. Back a long time ago, the TV show Roseanne, that was a very successful sitcom in the, I guess, late 80s, early 90s. Several years into that show, the oldest daughter, I think her name was Becky, just changed, but became a different actor, and TV shows do that kind of stuff all the time. Movies do that all the time with sequels when they can't get the actors back, or the sequel looks like it's going to be bad, so the original actor won't do it. Well, then you say, okay, without question, they can bring that character back as a different person playing that character. But if they start trying to make that person just really look like the previous one and sound just like the previous one, at what point do they infringe on the rights of that actor? Versus the character that the film company owns versus the character's rights, the actor's rights for his own image and likeness and voice. And there's going to be lots of litigation coming up in the future, without a doubt, as AI becomes so capable of just completely replicating actors. And what are they owed? How much do you have to change it before you don't have to pay the actor also? Things like that.
Yeah.
And
Wild.
So it's interesting questions. It's definitely not decided law at this point because it's such a new area of the law. And that's why, like I said in the beginning, this whole Peter Cushing thing would be a perfect law school exam question. And I promise you, next semester, there are going to be law professors all over the country in the world that are going to present law school exam questions based on very similar to Peter Cushing's situation,
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, there you have it, kids. That this is the force of others, and for a little bit, we've been the force of law. So I like it. That's why we have people like Paul Hyde that can explain these things, where Zach and I are like, I don't know, I like deep fake Luke Skywalker, and Zach's like, I don't, and I'm like, well, and then you need people like Paul in the world to be like, well, hold on, let's talk about the legality of this, guys, not just whether or not he looks cool.
It's definitely
cool.
going to be addressed in contracts from this point forward. I have no doubt. But there are
Well-
going to be all these issues that it wasn't even contemplated at the time.
And to bring it back to Darth Vader, James Earl Jones did give the rights to his voice for Darth Vader to Disney to recreate. So,
And he was, we assume he was of sound mind when he did this, because I think it was a couple years ago.
yeah.
I'm pretty sure in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, that's exclusively like AI samples and kind of recreations of his voice through a program called Respeecher. It sounded cool to me.
I'm still against it.
Oh, I'm sure I get it, but at the same time, if James Earl Jones is like cool, you know what I mean? If he's cool with it, if for me personally, if he's cool with it, if the estate is comfortable with it, then I mean, sure. Like Paul said, I would be uncomfortable if somebody came out with a movie starring me that I had not in fact filmed. That would make me feel strange, unless the performance was good, and then I would just lie. And I would say, I don't know what you're talking about. I was there. I had a great time. It was so fun.
Now, where's
Those directors were. Yes. Now, please give me. Now, if they don't pay me any money, then that's not cool.
right?
But anyway,
That's the question. But yeah, I think we'll see. I don't think this lawsuit is going anywhere. I think this stuff is going to be addressed more clearly in other lawsuits that are coming, because I do think it is not clear at all that this guy actually even had those rights. That Peter Cushing's friend even had those. I think this is going to not go anywhere, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Seems fishy that it took 8 years for this to come to light.
Exactly.
But
and then he hasn't come up with any clear, just here it is, here's the contract, and I own this guy's likeness forever.
Yeah.
And I just can't imagine that's the case.
yeah. Well, right on. Well, this has been a fun episode. It's a different type of stuff. I think we've run the gamut. So real quick, Paul, where can the people find you on the internet if you want to tell them where they can find you? I guess.
I don't have
know.
such
Up
a
to you.
strong presence, but I have the Hyde Law Firm, and we have a website at hydefirm.com, HYDEFIRM.com, and then law firm here in Granbury. And aside from that, I'm not on any personally. I'm not on any social media except for Facebook. Again, just an old guy, so all those other ones kind of frighten me, and so I just stay away from them. Facebook's a great way to communicate with people, but that's about the only place that I am at. But I appreciate y'all having me on. I've certainly become a fan of your podcast since the very first episode, so it's a real honor to get to participate in something that I truly am a fan of. Love what you guys are doing, and Matt, I've loved you for a long time.
Thanks, man.
I was telling Zachary earlier. I mean, you've always been such a good influence, positive influence on my own kids, being theater kids that were mentored by you and taught by you, and I'm very appreciative of that. And my kids just love you also, so no doubt about it. They're hardly kids anymore, but.
It's few and far between two kids that make me feel older than when I see Briley and Lucas walking around that are now both taller than me and huge and fully grown, and I'm like, oh my God, stop it! Ah! So, can't even imagine how you feel having known them for their whole lives. But no, thank you, Paul.
Matt. I feel old, Matt. That's how I feel. Watching my son at Texas A&M yesterday, he's down there at College Station now, and we went down yesterday and saw him play bass in the Hullabaloo band at a volleyball tournament, and it was just awesome. But yeah, definitely.
That's cool.
Briley's driving now, and just really makes me feel old. But, it's great.
Melt my brain. Feel all the same way about you, man. Love you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
But Zach, where can the people find you?
Yeah, I'm Zachisfaction on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all that stuff. But the best way to find me is by emailing us at the forceofothersradio@gmail.com. That is our email. If you have any questions, please send us on. We didn't get to our mailbag today, but we promise we will get to it next week. But yeah, that's the best way to find me. Matt, where can they find you?
Oh, yeah, and on the mailbag real quick, the next one was from my little brother, and Mark, you can learn the art of patience. It'll be okay. we will get your question on there soon, buddy.
You already had one. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, you already had one. Wait your turn, little brother. But yeah, so you can find me on all the social medias that Paul is afraid of. That I also find quite frightening sometimes. Some of the arguments that we get on. But Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the stuff. Matt Beutner, Beutner. Good luck with your spelling. You can also find us. You can find Force of Others on Instagram and TikTok. All you TikTokers, I'm looking right down the barrel here. All you people that follow us on TikTok and don't follow us on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, hey man, support the show.
I think
I'm going to threaten you.
To say is, hey, we're really happy that you're following us on TikTok, and we're really grateful for it. If you'd like, you could hit the link to our Instagram, which will also take you to our YouTube, and we'd love to have you over there.
That's a nice way to say it. I don't know why I was trying to strong-arm you into supporting our show, but no. Well, however you interact with the Force of Others, we just hope that you interact. Send an email, send us comments. We'll get your questions on the show. And when we might keep having guests on like Paul, especially if we meet you through social media, and then find out what Star Wars means to you. Mm-hmm. But with all that being said, I think we did it for this week.
Yeah.
So, and remember, the Force of Others will be with you
always. The Force of Others, a Star Wars podcast.